All right. Welcome everyone to this Creative Careers workshop on the basics of freelancing. My name is Eilish. I'm one of the career advisors with the Creative Careers team. I'm joined today by my brand new colleague, Maria. Maria, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I've met a couple of you. I am 5 weeks in to my art center, time at Art Center. I come from uh, the creative industry where I've spent most of my career developing creative talent for um, advertising and design agencies and tech firms. So I'm really excited to be in higher ed, be at Art Center, because I've spent a lot of time creating creative learning environments in the business world, and now I'm bringing kind of business skills to the creative art world. So it's great to be here.
Amazing. So, we're going to be chatting, of course, today about the basics of freelancing. We're going to cover a variety of different topics. And really, this workshop is designed to kind of be a starting point for some areas of kind of thought or work that could make your freelancing practice more effective or nourish it more in depth if you are already practicing. But also, if you have other topics that you would like to learn about as far as freelancing is concerned, we would really love to know those as well. And there will be time to chat about those at the end. So, we wanted to get ourselves started today with just a little poll. This is something called Slido. And so, what you can do is tap into the QR code that you're seeing on your screen, or join us with the number code on the bottom left. And we want to know a little bit about who your creative hero is. This can be somebody that's really well known. It can be somebody that's a little bit more of a deep cut. But tell us who your creative heroes are. And while we're gaining that information, we're going to see it appear directly on screen. Bjork. Oh, I love Bjork. She's so fantastic.
And Eilish, I realized I did not say what I'd be doing at Art Center, which
Oh,
is
yes, please.
um, uh, helping to shape the creative entrepreneurship program that will be starting to roll out in the fall. So that's the work that I'll be doing here. And this is, the first step, this workshop.
Amazing. We're so excited. This is such an amazing space
Yeah.
for, student and alumni need.
I
Okay,
can't wait to
we've
look
got
up all these people I've not heard of yet.
Prince,
Yeah.
amazing. Rebecca Sugar, Nina Simone. I love that we have so many different types of artists
Yeah.
here. Very cool. Hans Zimmer, Stuart Candy, amazing. So, one of the reasons why we wanted to ask this particular question, I'm going to let Maria kind of talk about it a little bit more in depth, is about the fact that many of our creative heroes are actually folks that um, are very self-driven and have very similar kind of professional directions to what we might consider a creative entrepreneur or a freelancer. And it's really great to see, how many folks that we really admire and love and respect have similar types of experiences that we're interested in pursuing as well.
Yeah. Oftentimes people think of creative entrepreneurship as starting a business, and it can certainly be that, but really we're thinking about it more as a mindset. And it's about creating opportunities for yourself, spotting opportunities, creating opportunities, which I'm sure most of these people have done that. That's a core part of who they are. So it's coming at it from a mindset. And then there's so many different possibilities that open up when you think that way.
Absolutely. I don't think there's a single thing David Lynch has touched that he didn't change or make different with his own artistic vision. Rest in power. Very cool. Okay, wonderful. Well, in the interest of time, I'm so excited that you are all adding to this list. We're going to move into our agenda for today, but keep sharing, please. We would love to know more about who your creative heroes are. So let's quickly run through what we're going to be discussing today. First, we're going to kind of define what freelancing is to get us started. We're going to chat through some business basics. We're going to cover contracts and specifically how you would like to be paid. We're going to talk about finding and onboarding clients, some flags that you might want to consider when you're onboarding a client or when you're discussing a prospective new project. And then we're going to talk a little bit about managing client relationships and how to do that really effectively. So, what is freelancing? On a really basic level, it's getting hired to work on a by project basis rather than working through full-time employment. So this could look like, being paid a few $100s by a friend to design a D&D character for them one time, or it could look like a full-time creative practice in which you are working for yourself, in partnership with your clientele.
And the freelancer mindset is really you're a problem solver and you know more than you think you do. So just make sure you're going in with confidence and you're really listening to the potential client for what they need, because they need you as much as you need them. And so, um, thinking about kind of the business basics, the structure, full-time employees get a W-4 and they have their taxes taken out automatically. When you're a freelancer, you're operating as an independent contractor. And so you're responsible for taxes, benefits, business expenses. This sounds more complicated than it is, but it is important to know the difference. So you're not on the company's payroll, and typically you receive payment through invoices. So there's kind of a major decision that you have to make, which is how do you want to operate your business? If you plan to seek out clients and really actively cultivate clients, you want to have, a good portion of your income come from freelance, then you should probably consider getting a LLC, limited liability. If you're kind of an accidental freelancer, they projects come to you from time to time. It's friends or people in your network, people that you know, then maybe you're fine being a solopreneur. And we'll talk about the differences. So, solopreneurship is the most common and easiest because you don't have to do anything. It's the default structure. If you just start working on a project, your friend, asks if you can work on that logo. The pros are that you don't have to take any action. You report the income on your personal tax return. The cons are that you don't have any personal liability protection. So, if you have go into a little bit of debt for your business or there's any kind of legal issues, your personal assets could be at risk. It's harder to separate personal from business finances, and it looks less professional. Bigger companies will feel more comfortable if you have an LLC. So that brings us to the limited liability company. This is a legal entity and it separates your personal and businesses. The pros are that you're protected, your personal finances are protected from any debts or lawsuits. It adds professionalism to your business name, and you get an EIN, which is an employee identification number. Companies will ask for this. The tip, if you don't end up starting an LLC and a company asks you for this, is you can use your social security number. The drawbacks of an LLC are that it does cost some money to set up and maintain, anywhere from like $100 to $300 to start. And then there's a yearly maintenance fee of $50 to $800. It depends on which state you register your LLC in. You can choose any state to register it in. It doesn't have to be the state that you're in, which is good to know because, of course, California is the $800 price tag. So there's a few states that don't or charge very, very little. Um, let's go on to, yeah, Delaware. I know I was going to call out Delaware. Thank you, Camille. Um, so anytime you're getting paid to do work, you need a written agreement, aka a contract. There's several contracts. You're probably familiar with a few of them. We're going to go over them. The most common, what should be included in each one, consequences for not having a contract in place. So the types of contracts are statement of work, and then you'll also hear the term scope of work. They sound really similar, but they're quite different. The one that you're mostly going to use is the statement of work, and the reason is that is not just talking about the work that you're going to do, but it talks about the way that you will do business. It talks about how the work will get done. We'll go into detail of what that includes. The scope of work is more granular. Um, so you would use a scope of work if you want to have a detailed work breakdown for execution, if you need to ensure clarity on deliverables. Um, the scope of work is really more of kind of a contract agreement and setting expectations, payment terms. Then the next type of contract is a non-disclosure NDA. This is usually, it can go both ways, but typically the client will probably give you one because they want to share proprietary information as they onboard you onto a project. Then there's the work for hire. This will also come from the client side. There's another contract we're going to go over, which is a licensing agreement. And then lastly, the invoice. So statement of work includes, and we'll have handouts with, I think it includes templates, Eilish, right? So the statement of work is a high-level agreement that outlines the project terms. It's broad, it's strategic. It does include a scope of work, so you want to talk about the description, what work will and won't be covered, the purpose for the project. You'll say what is the intent of the client? How are you solving that? Um, it will include kind of deliverables, clarify what the end product is. You'll also want to include project milestones, and it depends too on how large this project is. Is it just a logo, then, you know, maybe you don't have milestones, or maybe you do. Maybe you have check-ins. You'll include a timeline, you'll include payment terms, and we'll talk more about this as well. You'll estimate the hours that it'll take to do this project and what the cost will be. And there's lots of different templates you can find, and we will give you one as well. But you can see kind of the beats. It doesn't have to be, I mean, the more detail, the better, because you're just when things aren't clear, there's more room for miscommunication. So be as specific as possible. It also doesn't have to be a whole dissertation, it could be a few sentences for each section. Um, Tasks, you may want to include this, maybe you don't, so you can modify this for your needs. The deliverables can you, Eilish, slide it over a little bit? So you can see how they have, you know, like a schedule. Maybe you want to break down certain kind of deliverables. Um, you would list any kind of resources. Maybe you'll need some resources or you'll utilize outside resources. And then do you want to slide over um, any terms and conditions? And we'll talk more about this. This would be like um, the kill fee, or if you want to put in a late payment fee, after a certain amount of days, if they're late on paying you, then you charge interest. We'll talk more about that as well. And then to make this a legitimate agreement, both parties have to sign it. So we'll talk about the cadence of this as well, but you would typically send this, they would look it over. When they feel comfortable with it, there might be some back and forth. They will sign it, and then they send it back to you signed, you sign it, and then you give them a copy so that both parties have a copy of the signed agreement. Non-disclosure agreement, I think probably everyone's pretty familiar with this, but this is really to protect IP. You can certainly give one to people if that makes sense. It'll probably most likely come from the client. This protects confidential information. Oftentimes it's a boilerplate agreement, which means it's generic and it doesn't specifically say what information is confidential or for how long. So really that's when you should ask questions and just really get clear on what you can talk about, if any aspect of the project, and what you can't. Then there's the work for hire agreement, and this means that the client owns the work that you create. So, it defines what rights, if any, you retain. And this is where you'd want to ask questions like, hey, can I show this work in my portfolio afterwards? If you can't, you might want to charge a little bit more because that's, you doing this work and being able to talk about and show examples helps you get new clients. And so taking that into account. Some contracts do blend both work for hire and a licensing agreement. Clients might request a work for hire initially for like core deliverables. And then they might say, oh, we'd love to like license for additional if we do something outside of the US or if we do a second run of something. So there's certainly blended contracts as well. And then licensing agreements. This is allows the freelancer to retain copyright ownership while granting clients specific rights to use the work under very defined terms. Again, the key here is being as specific as possible, and this is something that you would provide the client. It includes names of both parties, clearly defining the licensed work. Um, the scope of the license, the permitted uses, and then any restricted uses. Maybe there's specific things, places you do not want this work to be, and you'd want to call that out. The license duration, maybe they can use it for a year, but after that, they need to renegotiate. Payment terms, credits and attributions. Maybe part of the agreement is that they have to credit you for the design. Any modifications or derivative work. This is where you would say that they need written permission before they can modify anything that you've given to them. Termination clause. If either party needs to terminate early, what happens? And then indemnification and liability. So just making sure you're protected there. And then lastly, an invoice. And this is a document issued by you, the contractor, or the freelancer. And it really serves, this is basically when you're like, hey, it's time for you to pay me. It acts also as a record of the transaction. And this includes an invoice number, so a unique identifier. And this helps you to keep track for your records. I would say I would encourage you to have a corresponding spreadsheet where you have a list of all your invoices, tracking if you've gotten paid or not, um, what the numbers are, the date that it was issued. So you want to have the date that you send them the invoice, especially if there's a late payment fee. You'll be counting down the clock, and it's good to know when they've received the invoice. Um, Client information, their name, address, contact details, a description of the goods and services. This is basically a big receipt. Um, it could be a few sentences of the work that was done. It really kind of depends, or a line item. It really depends on what the project is. And then your quantity and rate, so the number of items or hours that you worked. And this corresponds to like price per unit. If you're getting paid by the hour, then you would have how many hours. If it's a flat project fee, then it would be that. And then the total amount due. Sometimes people put in taxes, sometimes they'll give a discount and that'll be included. I think we have an example on the next slide. Yeah, so you can see here, and again, you'll find so many different examples, and this is a great opportunity to, create your own template with your logo and, personal brand, but you'd have like build to, oh, thanks for sharing the invoice. This is great. Yeah, if you have any cool resources that would be helpful, feel for any of this stuff, please drop it in the chat. But you can see here, like there's rate, hour, total. Um, I love that they say thank you. That's nice. If you want to scroll down here, then you include your bank information because you want to make it as easy as possible for them to pay you. And this is where you see here on this one, there's payment is required within 30 business days of the invoice date. You need to make sure that that's part of the agreement up front. You can't spring that on them. And then, you know, sometimes people put in a late fee, sometimes not. That's really up to you. It is good to protect yourself. a late fee of X percentage may be applied if the payment is X days over the due date. You want to give them a little bit of a cushion. If it's 30 days, net 30, maybe, you give them a couple days grace period before you start charging. And the typical late fee I've found is like 3 to 5%. So, think, yeah, great. Thanks, Ken. Yep. And always Graphic Artist Guild is such a great resource. And I think we can go on to the next slide.
Fantastic.
Mhm.
So now we get to talk a little bit more in depth about payment structures, right? Because that invoice, as Maria mentioned, is going to be something that kind of formalizes what is already in the contract that you have signed with your client. And defining a payment structure in advance of beginning a project is going to create a more seamless experience for both you and for your client. So we're going to be chatting through types of structures, timing, different types of payment platforms, and then we're going to see kind of a review of payment terms in text, a little bit similarly to the invoice sample that we just looked at, so that we kind of get a sense of what this can all look like together. So, a typical payment structure is usually one of two things. It could be value-based or time-based. A value-based payment or payment structure is typically based on the scope of the project and then the impact that it will have for the client, and not necessarily based on the amount of time that it takes you to complete the project. So, a really great example of this might be a logo for a business. Let's say that it takes you maybe a total of 6 to 9 working hours to complete a logo for a business that you have contracted to work with. We might think this didn't take me that long, so I'm going to quote them X amount of money, a $500. Um, maybe I'll say my hourly rate is $45 an hour. So 9 times $45 an hour. However, when we think about the value that this particular asset produces for the client we're working with, we think about the fact that this logo is going to be on their website. It might be on their receipts when they sell things. It might be on merchandise like cups or bags or hats. It might be something that's on a sign that's directly on their business. It might be on t-shirts. There are lots of different ways that that logo can be used that's adding a considerable amount of impact or positive outcome for that client. And that value may be far larger in terms of impact than the amount of time that you spent working on that project. So rather than quoting them a rate based on the number of hours you worked, you might quote them a flat project-based fee, which Maria mentioned earlier, that summarizes kind of the total value that that particular piece has added to that client's kind of business. In the inverse, a time-based payment is going to be determined by the number of hours that you've worked or perhaps weeks, months, etc. So this might be a situation where you're contracted by a client to redesign their web interface or redesign an app for them. And you may find that after you kind of get into the project, there's a lot of different moving pieces. And it might be a project that you work on over many weeks or a few months. And it's your primary working role at that particular time. That might be something that you can't necessarily place a specific value for the client on, but you know how many hours you worked on it and you know that it was a long time. And for this, you might decide to quote them specifically the number of hours that you're working times your hourly fee. Which you choose to quote for a particular project really is based on what you feel most comfortable with and what is best suited for the project at hand. The Graphic Artist Guild handbook, which was mentioned in the chat earlier, offers some really great suggestions for pricing methods for different types of work. And I really recommend if you're in the graphic art space, if you're an illustrator, a graphic designer, etc., that guidebook is a really fantastic resource just to get a sense of how folks tend to price or approach payment structures for their work in these fields. So
I also want to just add to that, Eilish.
yeah,
And we are going to have a minute we'll have a couple different sections for questions, but just to build off what you said, when there's a project that has a lot of ambiguity, it's not clearly defined, it's better to do the time-based. When it's clearly defined a logo and you've done this before and you kind of know, um, and you've talked about in your agreement how many revisions and all that stuff, then it's much easier. That's a better way to do maybe the value based.
absolutely. That's a really great suggestion. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about ambiguity and kind of understanding your client goals in a little bit, but might still be situations where a project is a little bit more amorphous, and definitely helps to make sure that you're being paid for all of your time working through that ambiguity. So let's chat really briefly about timing. There are many different types of timing structures, but I want to talk about kind of three primary. The first and most common is a 50-50 split. So 50% of the project quote up front and 50% upon completion. This is really effective if you're doing a value-based payment structure. And it's really easy for everybody to understand. You have your client pay before you start the project, 50% of the quoted fee and then 50% upon completion, as the name states. Another potential timing structure for payment, though, is net 30. So, net 30, as Maria mentioned, is going to be within 30 days of completion of the project, you owe me the remainder of payment. So, that might look like requesting a certain amount as a retainer for your client. Maybe that's the 50% upfront, or a different percentage or number. And then the client is expected to pay you the remainder of that payment within 30 days of the completion of the project. And then finally, a monthly payment structure is one in which you set a minimum number of months and then a maximum number of months that you are able to work on that particular project. So this ensures that you are being contracted for an amount of time that is worth your time and involvement, but also that it doesn't exceed the amount of time that you're willing to work on a particular project. This could also be really great if you have, one of those slightly more ambiguous projects to let your client know in advance, this isn't something that I can kind of work on in perpetuity. I have this defined period of time in which I'm able to work on this project. Now, let's talk really briefly about payment platforms. So, there are a few secure payment platforms that we're going to recommend. These are by no means the only platforms that you can utilize, but these are the ones that are going to be kind of most common, especially if you are working with clients that are primarily based in the United States. So, a direct deposit is pretty standard. You'll notice from the invoice that we shared earlier that the account information was specifically for a direct deposit between bank accounts, but you may also consider Zelle or PayPal or other types of bank transfers. And all of these specific platforms have security measures built in, which is really fantastic. But what's most important is that you evaluate the overall nature of your services and your clients when choosing a platform. So, for example, if you find yourself often working with international clients, you may want to choose a platform that's really amenable to international money transfers, which may potentially not be a bank transfer or direct deposit. If you've decided to set up a payment structure where you're not doing kind of two payments over the course of your work, but multiple smaller payments once a week or once every 2 weeks, you might look at any related fees that are involved in those bank transfers and if those accumulate based on more frequent smaller payments versus fewer larger payments. And then also the ease of use for both yourself and your client. If it's a platform that's easy for you to use, number one, it's going to be a better experience for you. If it's a platform that is easy for your clients to use, you're ensuring that they're more likely to pay you on time or early, because it's not a platform that they have to kind of have difficulty maneuvering. It also ensures that you have less questions to answer for them about utilizing that platform, which again is really ideal. So This is what a structure of payment terms can potentially look like. And again, you're going to put this in a nice invoice, so it's going to be formatted really beautifully and very professionally. But you'll notice at the top that we're quoting the total project fee. So again, this might be value-based projects for one overall lump sum. And then you're going to include a payment schedule, which includes your deposit, which may be 50% upfront or a different percentage, due before work begins, and then listing out a series of payment milestones. So this would be the amount that's due and then the date that those payment milestones are due, followed by the final payment, which is due on project completion. It's really helpful in your payment terms to include your accepted payment methods, excuse me. So again, that could be bank transfer, PayPal, Stripe. It might also be really helpful to let a client know about these again at the beginning when you're discussing and kind of working through this initial contract, just to make sure that you're agreeing to payment methods that everybody's comfortable with. And then, as mentioned, we're going to include our late payment terms. So a late fee of X%, that might be 3 to 5%, may be applied if payment isn't received within X number of days of your due date. As Maria mentioned, we want to give them a little bit of a cushion, but don't feel like you have to be, overly generous on this front. You are working and you deserve to be paid for your work. So think about, how many days you would like to kind of set your late payment terms for. Maria, do you have a suggestion for a specific, like, kind of standard range, like maybe a week, less than a week, more than a week?
Yeah, and I think and I like that the framing here may be applied. I mean, you probably have a personal relationship. So this is really kind of the muscle that you have as a backup, but you hopefully don't have to rely on this. I will say the larger the company, the bigger the culprit. Typically, they take longer to pay. They just have more bureaucracy. They just have kind of more systems in place that slow things down. Um, I would say, yeah, net 90 is, I was going to say net 60 is feels like a lot. Net 90, yeah.
Very generous.
That's an example where if it's a net 90, then you definitely want to get some money up front. Um, I think I would do research and ask around. I will say too, with the payment schedule, sometimes it really depends on the size of the project. If it's a project that's like a one-time thing, then you don't need a schedule. If it's a project where, you're done in a month, maybe you just need the 50% up front, and you don't want to get into the situation where like every 3 days there's like a new payment due. So it really kind of depends on like you want to right size the payment schedule based on kind of the length of the project and how complicated it is.
Absolutely. That's a really great point, which brings us
To
to how we
consequences.
would love to close out this section, after which we're going to have some time for questions. So, the consequences of not having a contract.
So what could go wrong? Oh, so much. Um, Misunderstandings and conflicts, right? And it could be so well intended, but we don't always remember what we heard correctly. So having things in writing just makes it really clear. Um, Legal disputes, right? If the misunderstanding escalates, it could go into legal disputes. Delayed payment or not getting paid at all. Scope creep is probably the biggest culprit. Doing more work than you initially agreed upon, because if it's not getting compensated for it, if it's not written down, if this project is, and again, people could have the best intentions, they're not trying to get work out of you, but the project that you're working on is evolving, and so just making sure that it is very clear the work you're doing and the work you're not doing. And then intellectual property issues. So it makes clients also feel more confident in you. It comes off as more professional when you present them and insist on having an agreement in place. It causes red flags to go up if you are willing to do work and not have, and vice versa. So it really is a sign of professionalism. You're setting the relationship up to be successful when you have written agreement in place.
So we've shared a lot of information thus far. This has been very meaty. We're going to open up the floor for some questions. I want to keep us on track with time for our end time of 6:30 today. So I'm going to set us a timer for about 7 minutes for questions. And I want to start with some of the questions that are in our chat, actually. So Maria, are you okay with me sharing some
Yeah.
questions directly from the chat?
Yeah, and I will say too, there's another questions section as well. So yes, let's hear them.
Awesome. So the first question that I see here is, do freelancers ever have to deal with non-compete clauses?
That is a good question. I am not sure. In my personal experience, I have not, but I feel like there's probably quite a bit of freelancers here. Does anyone want to respond to that? Does anyone have a point of view? Great.
Um,
Um,
I can speak to just in my professional in California, typically non-competes. If everybody's in California, if it's employers or employees, they're not enforceable. So if you're doing work in California and you're an employee or employer in California, typically they're not enforceable.
Great. Thank you for answering that.
That was a great question. Thank you. So our next question is, how do you enforce the fee schedule when you set it up in your contract?
That's a good question. I mean, this usually this is relationship based. You have some sort of relationship. It's either someone that you've known that brought you in or is reaching out, or it's someone like a friend of a friend, someone within your network. So hopefully there's already trust built in. Um, that's what the late fee, being able to dangle that is really kind of where you can protect yourself. So, you want to make it so that, we don't want to have a late payment fee, but you know what, maybe you make a little bit more money if they're going to be delayed. So when you're calculating that, figure out like, okay, worst case scenario, if there's a delay, what would I feel okay with? What would feel like fair compensation for having to wait a little bit extra?
Awesome. And I see that we have somebody who's raising their hand in the Zoom. Alvalin, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question,
Sure.
love to
Thank
answer
you.
it.
Yeah, it's Alvalin. I've been freelancing for over 40 years, Art Center alum, so it definitely can be done and very successfully. Um, the payment that what I came to terms with a number of years ago with getting paid is to um, get a down payment up front, work until you use up that payment, get paid at the next milestone, work until you use up that payment, and then if there's another milestone, then you get paid again, and then make sure you're paid in full before you release the work to the client. This avoids having to do like payment fees, having to chase payments, and I figured this out by myself having to chase non-paying clients, late paying clients, and clients who wanted to dicker over what they thought they should pay me after we'd contracted everything. And it's really important to always use a written contract. And if your client will not sign a written contract, you don't have a client. Just, walk away from it. It's not worth the trouble. It's not worth your time. So it's very important since I make a full-time living pretty much off of my freelance work. It's very important that I make sure that I can pay my mortgage and my household bills and everything from my business. So do everything you can to establish payment terms up front in writing with the client. I don't charge late fees because if I'm not paid at the milestone when I invoice, I don't complete the project. And that's built into my
Mhm.
contract terms. So that's just the way that I do it.
That's an interesting approach. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. We have, I think, time for maybe one more question for the moment. And again, we're going to have two more of these baked in a little bit later on. So if we haven't gotten to your question yet, do not worry. So our next question is, aside from invoicing, do you have any recommendations for personal bookkeeping and other administrative work? This is an area that I struggle with, having made the jump from full-time to freelance.
I would love to open it up and see from the wisdom of the crowds. Does anyone want to share their tips for staying organized with the paperwork?
I'll highlight that we had a recommendation of Intuit with QuickBooks.
Yeah.
And if you have any recommendations, I recommend adding them into the chat so that we can all see them. That would be super helpful.
My personal experience is, I would have reoccurring clients, and so I just keep a spreadsheet. That's my system. Um, and just being really diligent about invoice numbers. That's where having kind of invoice numbers, having systems in place. Um, but it is important. It's not the fun part, but it's once you figure out your system, you don't have to keep thinking about it, right? It just makes it a lot easier to do that side of the business. But I don't know if anyone else wants to add any tips on that. And this is great too, because we are going to do more workshops. This is just the beginning for creative entrepreneurship. So all of these questions, and we'll ask later on kind of what you want to hear more about. We will build more content around your question. So I think what your question probably warrants a whole, workshop.
Awesome. Okay, fantastic. So we're going to move into our next topic in this presentation. But I noticed quite a few questions have come in that we're actually going to be covering very shortly. So again, if we haven't answered your question yet, don't worry, there will still be time and we may answer it automatically in our presentation. So let's talk a little bit about finding and onboarding clients.
Yes. Okay. So very important. Well, first of all, your creative community, your network, is your best resource in general, and especially for finding clients. So we will talk about defining your audience, like who is your client, having a professional presence, self-promotion, building relationships, and then onboarding a client. So defining your audience, really, you need to know what problem you solve. What is it that you do? How do you help people? Because that will tell you who your clients are, who are the people that you need to be talking to. So the first step is identifying your core service, being really clear and descriptive about that. Um, don't assume that even your best friend knows exactly what you do, what your specialty is. You really need to be explicit about it and be able to communicate it. Then you want to create, once you have your core service, you want to create your ideal client profile. And this is really like a persona for you. Who are the people that you want to, who has the problem that you know how to solve? Write a couple sentence description about who they are. Um, and then once you have this description, you can then start a list of potential clients. There's so many different ways to do this. You can use LinkedIn, trade magazines, design boards, innovation boards. It really depends. Desktop research, maybe it's industry focused. So this is where once you have that clear picture of like who your audience is and really being specific, it shouldn't just be anyone with a business who needs a logo. How can you focus it in a little bit more? Maybe it's people that are just starting out, or maybe it's people in the healthcare space. You really want to focus on that. So have more of a focus. It'll make it easier to find the people, as opposed to being this kind of being willing to like help anyone or kind of look for any client. Um, then you want to make a list. Oh, sorry, can you go back one? You make a list of people and companies that match your ICP, your ideal client profile. And this is where, again, spreadsheets are great. You can keep track of who you've talked to, who you know there. Okay, so professional presence, this is really important, and clarity and consistency is the key. So making sure that across your different channels, you define your personal brand, you have a website that's geared towards clients. And when you're building this website, think about it, look at the website through their eyes. What will they be coming for? They've got a problem. They're not just perusing a website, they've got a problem. They're looking for someone to help them solve it. So they're coming with that orientation. So you want to be clear about how you can help them. Um, this, should include your services, body of work, so you can make them feel comfortable and excited to work with you. A bio, people want to, we're all humans. At the end of the day, people want to, be excited and, with the person they're working with. Like, why do you love doing what you do? So tapping into your purpose and your why. And then establishing social media presence. LinkedIn is social media. I know some people are like, does that count? It definitely counts. It's not as much fun as Instagram, but it is where you need to be, especially if you're a small business. So establishing that presence and making sure you're consistent across all of your channels, and then participating in online community. And this is really important. We're going to talk more about this too, building relationships, because really your relationships are the key to your success. Your relationships, your community is the quality of your relationship will determine how many opportunities that you get. So participating in community on and off, making people feel comfortable doing business with you, um, growing your community, networking, linking people in. So hopefully at the end of this, Eilish and I have 54 LinkedIn requests from all of you. You don't have to have a one-on-one conversation to link someone in. Um, yeah. All right, and then self-promotion. Okay, so self-promotion is necessary. It's noisy out there. We have a lot of people and things competing for our attention. So it's really important to let people know what you're about, how you can help them. One way to think about self-promotion or to make it feel less icky is to tap into your passion. Passion is magnetic. And so tapping into why you do what you do and talking about it from that place will be more enjoyable for you. You won't feel like you're selling. And it just we're naturally drawn to people that are excited about what they're doing. Um, so letting your network know how you can help them. I've in the past, I've sent out notes to my network and been explicit of like, hey, this is what I'm looking to do. If you know anyone, please send them my way. Um, you want to make sure that you're giving and taking. So looking for ways to provide value to your community by sharing articles or elevating others is another great way to be part of the conversation and not feel like it's coming from a place of ego. And then being consistent with your look and messaging so that people in their mind, they get locked in, oh, this is what this person does. If someone's looking for a freelancer or someone to work on this project, the first person that pops into my head is you, because you've told me this message over and over again. And then building relationships, this is ongoing. Getting out there, showing up to things. Of course, there's online too, but really offline is more resonant. You're not going to meet your next client in your kitchen. So showing up, being curious about what others are up to, looking for opportunities to support other people, cultivating your network in the various ways that we've talked about. You want to be a good community member. And so that's like, we see on LinkedIn, we all, I'm sure we all get this like, hey, do you know someone that does transportation design? Or, I'm looking for someone to do this. And when it might not be for you, but that's where you could tag people in your community or you can forward it on. So, that connection and passing opportunities to people, that's currency. And so the more you do that, the stronger your relationships will be and the more you'll get in return. Okay, onboarding clients. You want to define the process ahead of time so that you're just ready to go when a client comes your way. There's four main parts. It's the discovery call, the follow-up email, the informal proposal, and then the formal agreement or statement of work. So the discovery call, this is a conversation that you have with a potential client. You're learning more about the project and if it's something that you want to do and something that you can do. Um, this is about understanding the goals of the client and what they're asking of you. You want to make sure that you ask questions about their budget and timeline, their approval process. Um, this is your opportunity to vet them and the opportunity. It's not about saying yes. It really is about learning. So this is where you take in the information and then you let them know, you'll follow up, and if it's something that you can do or not. You do not have to quote a price on the spot. I would encourage you to take a minute, do some research, sit with it before you quote it, and then record the call with their permission so that you can go back and listen to it. And, so that when you're in the discovery call, you're not busy taking notes, you're really kind of present with them. And then you can go back and re-listen to it for the follow-up email. The follow-up email lets them know you are interested in the project. This is where you're like, you know what? That was a great discovery call. I can do this. I am really excited about this. You'll rewatch the video so you can recap any of their top priorities. You want to include a personalized note so that they feel like, wow, this person's really listening to me. They get it. You might want to include samples of your work that are relevant, maybe that they hadn't seen, or maybe they're on your website, but you've got a lot of stuff on your website and there's a specific project that's really relevant. You might want to just include it. Um, Ask any clarifying questions. Usually there's a few questions that arise that you didn't ask in the discovery call. So this is a great time to do that. And then you let them know, hey, I'm going to put together a proposal and you can expect that in X amount of days. You'll get a sense for their timing. If they're like, we need this thing done by Friday, then you probably want to turn the proposal around quickly. And it's probably not a huge project. If they've got a lot of time, then you can take a couple, you can have a little bit more time with getting the proposal back to them. So you just want to be sensitive to their timing and how big the project is. And then the informal proposal, and this can be in an email. This could be part of like an email exchange. It could be a one pager. Maybe you write up your notes. It's high level. You're not getting into the weeds at this point of how many revisions. You're just talking high level about the project, how you would approach it, your estimated time and cost. Then um, they yeah, so the informal proposal focuses on the work. This is really kind of the scope of work, you know, as opposed to the statement of work. So you'll send that off to them, could be, in an email, and then they will send it back to you or they'll be like, great, this sounds great. That's when you send that's when you write up the statement of work, where you then, okay, now let's define how we're going to work. We've talked about the actual work itself. Now let's talk about the arrangement. And that's where you do the statement of work.
Amazing. So we have another moment for some questions, and we've gotten quite a few in over the last 15 minutes or so. I want to go back to a question that was asked earlier on that I think is actually really relevant to this topic that we just discussed, which is what should you do when the scope of work changes while you're working on a project? I've had friends tell me to just try to make up the difference on the next project so as not to spoil the working relationship. So I think in this particular circumstance, we've signed a contract that states the scope of work, but the scope of work changes regardless. What do we recommend doing in this particular case?
So there's a thing called a change order. And that is something we didn't cover. That would be the 102 class, but change order is something that you would define upfront. So that would be if it's a bigger project or it's a more amorphous project where, there's going to be changes potentially, then you'd want to define what you do, what's the arrangement if there's a change. And so oftentimes, and it really depends on how big the company is, kind of what the situation is, but the more buttoned up you can be, just the the more likely the relationship and the project will be successful. But so look into a change order. I personally don't have a ton of experience with change orders, so I'm wondering if there's someone else that maybe has more experience and wants to share some advice.
Absolutely. If you do have experience in this way, um, Evelyn, I'm gonna tag you in again if you'd like to share briefly what you would recommend in this situation.
Hi there again. I don't mean to like take up everything, but
Not at all. Thank
I,
you.
I implemented change orders a while back because scope creep, especially on larger projects when you have clients who are pinging all over the place with great ideas or they need to shift for budgetary reasons or whatever, change orders prevent having to go back and rewriting the contract. And the way I use change orders is that we have this discussion. It's usually, most of my clients are not near me, so we have a discussion or an email back and forth or a text back and forth, or Zoom or whatever. I take copious notes, I email the notes, then I put the notes into a change order. So the client is getting basically a synopsis of my understanding of what we talked about. Then I put everything into a change order, which includes um, money budget and time budget. So how it's going to affect the money, the creative fees and the expenses, because those are two different things in the contract, and also the delivery schedule, because very often scope creep will change the timing of the project. It'll push back deadlines and things like that. And the change order, it's, if you're removing things and adding things, replacing things within the scope of work, that's detailed out exactly what you're doing, be exact and as specific and itemized as possible. And if it's just adding on to the scope of work, then again, be exact. What exactly are your deliverables? When are you going to have your first review? How many reviews are you going to have? And is there going to be extra if you're charging by the project or value based? Are those extra reviews going to impact the budget? So you need to be real distinct and clear, but change orders are very appropriate. The one thing I do recommend is that you do not start any new work or any work at all until you have a written agreement in place, whether it's the initial contract or the change order. And then you also, if there's a budgetary impact, then you invoice and get paid before you begin the work.
Awesome. Thank you. That was so helpful. I appreciate you sharing that. Okay, I have a question here about freelancing as it relates to work visas that I would love to answer very quickly. So the question is it possible to use freelancing to get a work visa to another country? I can speak specifically for the United States that generally speaking, freelancing is not a pathway to specifically H-1B visa sponsorship. There are some visa options in the United States, for example, the O visa, that don't necessarily require you to be sponsored by a specific employer. And if you're a current student at Art Center, the Office of International Student Services will be really well able to kind of describe these different options. For work visas to countries outside of the United States, if you're, in the US and you're looking to work elsewhere, that's going to depend on each individual company or country. And I would really recommend if you have the option to schedule a meeting with somebody from the embassy for that country that is closest to where you live. So if you're in Los Angeles, that might be in LA, or potentially there is many embassies that are based in San Francisco who will be able to explain to you the different types of work visas that are available for that country and what specific working opportunities are covered by those work visas. So it definitely depends on your specific situation. And then I think maybe we can do one more question before we move on to our final kind of push of info, and our final Q&A, which is, how should I figure out my rate? I'm just getting started into freelancing, and I'm not sure how I should price myself. Maria, do you have any thoughts on this?
I'm trying to think if I would like to open it up. I think I don't know if I have a succinct answer for this right now. I think it depends on figuring out how much you want to get paid. Is this just a one-off project? Are you thinking about what are your rates? You want to go full-time freelance? Um, I would do some research. I would ask around too, like, what are your peers getting paid for this kind of work? It really varies too by, industry. Um, so that's something yeah, I think it's too hard to answer without having more specifics.
I'm going to throw out a couple of thoughts, all of which mirror what you just said, which is that it's very specific to each individual, and research is really important. So, number one, it is really important to know general standards for kind of what is expected in your industry. And you can do this by asking peers. You can also do this with like a really general search on sites like Payscale or salary.com. Those sites are like crowdsourced and aggregated numbers based on specific locations and number of years of experience. They're definitely not perfect. I don't think that you should do that research and then take that number and run with it. But I do think that they're a really good starting point. Another great way is to think backwards, especially if you're looking to freelance full time, based on what your kind of annual take home, what you want that to look like. So, for example, if you say, I would like to make approximately $80,000 a year, and I would like to ideally work around X number of hours a week, we can work backwards to an hourly rate at the very least that represents that annual salary, strong quotations, as well as those weekly worked hours. And this is really helpful because I think it gets you also to see the long run, not just what am I making on an hourly basis, but what does this look like annually? And especially as a freelancer, you might also be looking at paying into healthcare if you don't have healthcare through another resource, paying into retirement or any other types of kind of benefits along those lines. And so looking at the overall number that you would like to be left with over the course of a year can be really effective. And then finally, very quickly before we move on, I really recommend that when you're pricing yourself, however you land on a number, you approach it from the perspective of not looking to undercut your peers. I know that we had a comment in the chat about this specifically, and sometimes we can get into this space of if I offer a lower rate, then I will get the client or the job, because I'm offering them a service that will cost them less in the long run. And we can actually flip that on its head, where if everybody asks for the hourly rate or the project-based rate that they feel comfortable with, rather than trying to undercut each other, then we can kind of raise the expectation of payment across the board, which is really good for everyone, yourself and your peers, other freelancers in the long run, which is great. So let's move forward. Again, we're going to have some more time for questions as we get closer to the end, but we want to talk a little bit about some flags that you can take notice of when you are going through your onboarding experience and how you can use the onboarding experience to kind of determine if this is a client that you want to work with. So we're going to start with green flags, and everybody knows green means go. So these are some signs that a client might be really great to work with. Number one, they're open to your contract. They're as has been mentioned by multiple folks, they're really accepting of the fact that you have a specific contract that you would like them to sign. They don't have concerns about it, or if they do have concerns, it's more so about better understanding the terminology. Number two is that they know what they want. They're able to share with you specifically what they're looking for in a specific project that allows you to determine, number one, if this is going to be a value-based or time-based project, payment structure, whether or not it's something that you feel is within your wheelhouse, how long approximately it may take you, and generally speaking, whether or not you want to pursue this particular project. They respect your expertise as a creative. So they know that they're hiring you because you can do the job that they need done. And they appreciate the skill, the talent, and the design thinking approach that you're bringing into this experience. Next, they're communicative, but they're not pushy. They're there to answer questions when you have them, or when you send out an invoice, they register that they've received that invoice and will be following up. But they don't expect you to be on call to them at all times or available to speak every single day or whenever they ask. And then finally, they feel comfortable with your proposed payment plan. They, again, are accepting of the stipulations of your contract, and they're not looking to say, that doesn't work for us, or that doesn't make any sense, or anything along those lines. So next we have orange flags. And I'm titling these orange because it doesn't mean that this is a client that you don't want to work with, but more so that it may be a moment for you to pause and say, how can I use this conversation to determine whether this is somebody that I want to work with or not? So one great example of this might be that they request speculative work for their project for you to prove your skills, despite the fact that you've already shown them your portfolio. You may use this opportunity to share that you're not willing to do speculative work without pay, and outline the payment that you would expect to do kind of a spec mock-up of the design work that they're looking for, which in theory you're already doing because you present them with the scope of work. And then decide that you're, not comfortable doing that work for them. They may not have a strong vision of the work that they want, which might lead to ambiguity or difficulty meeting the deliverables that they're expecting. And finally, they say things that sound kind of like, this shouldn't take that long, or this isn't a big thing, which can either be undervaluing of your skill and your talent and the work that you're bringing in, or potentially not a strong and formal understanding of the amount of work that it takes to go into a certain project. Again, these aren't necessarily signs that you don't want to work with this client, but they're signs that you might want to have a more in-depth conversation about some of these things to ensure that both you and your client are having a good experience. And then finally, red flags. We're going to call these red flags because, again, from our perspective, these are clients that you likely don't want to work with. Number one, they refuse to sign a contract. We've had it said many times now how important contracts are. If they refuse to sign a contract, it might not be somebody that you want to work with. If they have unreasonable demands for your pay, for your time, for the speed at which you're able to deliver them work, if it's difficult to get in contact with them, and you're left with questions unanswered or other things related to the project, it may be difficult to get in contact with them about your invoice or about payment down the line. If they refuse to give you a budget for the project, if you have no idea what they're willing to pay, you can't determine if you're the right fit based on what you know you need to be paid in order to complete this work. And also, if they've fired or they speak poorly about previous freelancers. Generally speaking, this is a great word of warning for anybody looking to work in any kind of field. If the people that you're looking to work with are speaking poorly about other folks that they've worked with in the past, it may be a sign that there are some things going on within that organization that you may not want to be involved in. Now, with all of this in mind, there are some red flags, and then there's the next step down the line, which are freelance scams. And we want to highlight just a few telltale signs of freelance scams to avoid, just to make sure that you are keeping your experience as safe and effective for you as possible. So, number one is that it feels too good to be true. The project, the payment, something about it just feels like the dream opportunity that you couldn't have imagined. Very often, that tends to be the case, that it is too good to be true. If they contact you with a non-professional email address, for example, they say that they're from Nike, but then their email address is Nike Shoes Recruiting at gmail.com. This is a huge red flag that they're emailing you from a Gmail email address. If the posting or if the communication with you contains a lot of spelling errors, this can be a huge flag for scams. If you don't have to interview with them before they offer you the position, if you don't have to get on a call or hop on a Zoom or something along those lines where you can verify the person that you're speaking with, this potentially might mean that you're working with scams. If you have to pay in order to start your work, this could be a scam. And finally, if they want you to pay through insecure payment methods, things like cryptocurrency, or other forms of method to get you your payment in the end, again, this could be a sign of a scam. There are actually far greater signs, almost too many to include in a single slide. And if you ever have any questions about a particular opportunity potentially being a scam, please don't hesitate to reach out to Creative Careers. We'd love to kind of troubleshoot that experience with you. But try to, as much as you can, trust your gut. Very often, something about an experience kind of pings your concern a little bit. And it's always helpful to just have a second pair of eyes on something like this to make sure that you don't get involved with something that you don't want to. So let's talk really briefly about managing our client relationships as we prepare to wrap up this presentation today. As we mentioned earlier, nourishing relationships and having really strong communication is going to be the best thing for the health and the longevity of your freelance practice. So how to manage client relationships effectively. I think the phrase generosity cuts through the noise, which Maria added in here, is a really wonderful description. So making sure that you're defining the process for them ahead of time, developing systems and templates to make things like email outreach, invoicing, contracts easy for both you and them. And then creating a client-centered experience so that they really do feel like you're attentive to their needs and goals for the duration of the project. So, including client-centered experiences can be things like practicing two-way feedback, receiving feedback from them, diplomatically and professionally, but also letting them know if they've shared something with you that isn't as helpful so that the next time that get feedback or have a conversation with them, they're able to practice and share that information with you more effectively. Ensuring that you're communicating effectively, that you're communicating with a really strong professional tone, and that you're setting really clear expectations. Again, making sure that you're using your onboarding experience to determine if this is a client that you want to work with. And also using that onboarding experience to learn as much as you can about the project to set yourself up well to absolutely knock it out of the park. Putting yourself in your client's shoes, thinking about what types of questions they might have, anticipating those, and being able to offer that information. Understanding that they might not know what you know about the design work that you're doing. And so we can help them understand and bridge the gap between what we're sharing and maybe what they might be asking questions about. And then finally, keeping retention in mind. And client retention doesn't just look like this client coming back and offering us another project in the future. Working with a client on a logo that's a relatively small scale project in the grand scheme of things may not lead to that client necessarily coming back to you. But that client knows other people. And you don't know necessarily who that client knows, who they can say, oh my God, I had such an amazing time working with Maria. She was so prompt. She did amazing work. I had such an amazing experience. And I feel like my needs were really listened to over the course of this project can be a really amazing way to broaden the scope of your community. And of course, if that original client comes back to you as well, that's amazing too. So let's review some overall tips as we finish up. We open up our last few questions for the day. Number one, know yourself to know your ideal clients, right? Knowing who you are, what you can bring, what's unique about you helps you to identify that ideal client profile. Establish a contract. Don't ever do any work without a contract. Make sure that you're defining expectations for that project in advance. Choose payment structures that work best for you and for your clients. And manage your client relationships with retention in mind. Not only do you not know who your client knows, but all of those relationships are going to be what, again, nourishes and ensures the longevity of your practice in the long run. So, with that said, we have one more little poll for everybody, and we're going to take some time to answer some questions. I would love, again, for anybody to tune in to our Slido and let us know what other aspects of freelancing you would be interested in learning about. We're going to take all of this information as we prepare for our next iteration of this workshop. And while we're collecting that information, I'm going to throw out some more questions, if that is okay. Let's see. I have a question regarding payment. In a business law class, I learned about the concept of escrow, which is money stored for the project by a third party for release upon the completion of that contract. Can you talk a little bit about what you know about escrow and if it can be released alongside project benchmarks?
Ooh, that is a more of an advanced question. I really don't have experience with escrow in terms of in a work context, but maybe uh, Alvalin does or someone else does. I've not heard of escrow with work, but maybe that was like a really long. Yeah, I don't know how to answer that right now, but we can research it and get back to you.
Evelyn,
Okay,
please, if you would
great.
like to share.
Sorry, I feel like I'm, co-piloting this.
No,
Great.
You
great.
know, I
MVP.
actually teach this stuff. So, and I just put my freelance road trip thing in the chat for anybody
Great.
who wants to take advantage of it. Um, Escrow is not usually, I mean, attorneys do that. You pay them a bunch of money up front, and then basically they work to that end, and then they bill you again. So it's you give them a basically a retainer. Escrow can work, I believe, with a retainer, and that's a whole different ball game. But a lot of freelancers do work on retainer. I have in the past. But what I was saying previously about invoicing and getting paid before you begin the work, and then working to the point that you use that retainer, in other words, you reach the first milestone, and then you invoice again and work based on that invoice and payment until you reach the next milestone where you're going to invoice again. That's kind of the same idea as an escrow account. But the idea of an escrow account is you have a reserve account where money goes in and you draw on it as you need to, or whatever. But you don't need to set up a separate bank account if you do the getting paid up front, so you never have to chase payments. One of the things you don't want to overcomplicate, and since you're an independent contractor, as a freelancer, uh, you don't need to have more than one business account going, and it will just complicate your life if you try to act as if you are a partnership or a larger corporation or a firm, an agency. So that's my take.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And I'm just going to highlight again, Evelyn shared a really great link resource in the chat, freelancerroadtrip.com, if anybody is interested in checking that out. Thanks everybody who has added some aspects of freelancing that they're interested in learning more about Does anybody have any other questions that we haven't touched on thus far? Or maybe a question from earlier in the chat that I missed for today? Again, you can unmute yourself if you'd like. You can drop your question in the chat, whichever you prefer.
Oh, I think Cole has a question about, or this is a little while ago. Have we gone over where we can view contract agreement templates? Do you want to talk about the leave behind?
Absolutely, yes. This is a great opportunity to plug. So following this workshop, everybody who's in attendance today is going to receive a recording of this workshop and a leave behind resource doc that kind of reviews a lot of the overall material we talked about today and will include a lot of hyperlinks to resources. That ideally should come out before the end of this week, so you'll have access to those. But in the meantime, I really recommend checking out the Graphic Artists Guild website, which has many different contracts or contract templates, everything from invoices to individual kill fee agreements to like larger, broader scope contracts. There are a lot of different opportunities or a lot of different contracts that are shared there that can be a great starting place for kind of what can this look like and what can I include. But if you would like to wait to see what we recommend, that leave behind will come in just a couple of days directly to your email with a copy of the recording for this workshop. We had another question, best ways to find freelance opportunities. So I guess like after you've kind of cultivated your community and kind of tapped into the community, what else can you do to find new opportunities?
I think LinkedIn is a great place because it's your community and then some. Putting out there, being explicit about what you offer and how you can help people is a great place to cultivate. Also, showing up, going to different meetup groups or just getting out in general and kind of trying to get outside of your core community to meet new people. Um, and then I am curious if other people have sources, if there's sites that people like to go to for freelance projects.
I'll also just add, especially as it relates to LinkedIn,
Mhm.
as somebody who has not freelanced but like works in this space and knows a lot of amazing freelancers, something that I've always found is that you kind of have to share your work to find more work, right? And to Zeke's point, post on your Instagram regularly. I think this is a really great point. Like folks don't necessarily know what you potentially may be able to do for them or somebody that they know if they don't see your work. So sharing your work, even when you're not even actively seeking freelance work, or if the work isn't, specific to the type of work that you want to do, can be really helpful in letting folks know, hey, here's what I work on. If this is of interest to you, please let me know. I would love to work with you. If this might be of interest to somebody that you know, let me know or pass them along. Once they see the visual of kind of what that end product looks like, I think that they're better able to connect. This is something that may be, beneficial for me or beneficial for somebody else that I know. Any other questions or thoughts? We've gotten so many great recommendations for our next set of topics for this particular part two workshop. So thank you, everybody. We're going to keep all of these in mind. And please keep an eye on our upcoming events and workshops for the next time that we offer a part two, a part three, maybe a part seven to this workshop moving forward, all with, slightly more focused and curated opportunities.
That and we'll be building out the creative entrepreneurship program, so stay tuned. And please reach out if you have other questions or ideas that could help support this community. we'd love to hear it.
Amazing. Okay, I am going to put up our contact information here as we prepare to close out our evening together. Thank you all so much for joining us for an hour and a half, giving us so much of your time. It was so great to chat with everybody. For anybody who is interested in getting in touch with us, you can reach us by email at careers@artcenter.edu. You can reach us over the phone, and you can check out our website if you're interested in seeing the resources that we have kind of evergreen baked in there. As I mentioned, keep an eye out on our upcoming events for other workshops that you might have interest in, and for the follow-up email that will include this recording, as well as the leave behind with all of our amazing hyperlinks and resources. We're so grateful that all of you
Yeah,
joined us this evening. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here.
yeah, thank you.
All right, I am going to